Hey guys, 26 Engineering here. Today we're going to be going over the new kit we're going to be putting out so you guys can shorten your pumps yourselves. First off, the kit's going to include a shortened shaft, all the gaskets and O-rings and seals you're going to need, our AN adapter for the side of the pump, as well as a new back plate to the pump so it'll fit in your stock bracket. Some of the tools you're going to need a pair of snap ring pliers. I use a small flat screwdriver, an O-ring pick. You'll need your impact. You need a 12 millimeter, then you'll need a T40 and a 24 millimeter socket. You will also need a press, a shop press. I have had good luck using a dead blow hammer, and sometimes you can get the bearing out and put the new one in with just a dead blow. It really depends on how much corrosion your pump has. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, set everything else aside for now. We're going to disassemble this pump. The way I like to do it, first clean the pump up the best you can. I do a bead blast on these. As you can see, I don't have to bead blast this section because it's going away. I just take care of the front section there. I like to have two separate bins, and what we're going to do is when we remove the internals of the pump and any bolts and pieces with them, we're going to keep the back half in one tub and the front half in the other tub. So we'll grab our 12 millimeter socket here. We won't be using these stock bolts. You can set these aside. It helps to give a little wiggle to it and even a little tap as you're pulling these pieces apart. It helps them separate from each other. You're not pulling some of the guts out with it if you can help it. Again, we won't need this back plate. We can set that aside. We will be reusing this rear hub inside that holds the vanes in for the rear section of the pump. That's going to move actually to the front portion of the pump. So now we can separate the pump itself. Make sure that sometimes the vanes will fall down inside some of these holes as you're disassembling the pump. Not a big deal. You can usually get them out, and usually there's plenty. They're the same front and rear, so if you do lose some in the rear section, don't worry about having to get them out. They can be shaken out pretty easily, but there's plenty front and rear. We'll clean them up and we'll reuse them. It doesn't really matter which one you use. I try to stick to the front or the rear as a set, but it shouldn't really matter. So, all right, next step, grab your snap ring pliers. Junk in there. So every now and then I'll try just a little tap on the back. In this case, it popped this up. That doesn't always happen. I got lucky. These can be very difficult to remove from the inside of these pumps. It's very critical that they go back in correctly. Orientation, it's the same, but sometimes it fits one way and not the other, so it's very important, and we'll discuss that in the reassembly, not to force these back in. I got real lucky. This one popped out like it did. Usually they don't come out like that. Usually I tap them on this end and just very slowly work them out. It's the one thing that you could damage your pump trying to get this out if you use too much force, and then the pump is trash at that point. So just be very careful when you get these out. There is a seal or O-ring around the outside here that we won't need anymore. Again, this will go in the front section. We're going to reuse that. Here's the wave washer that's on the front there. We'll reuse that as well. And then there is one small O-ring on the inner shaft in here. Okay, and then lastly, before we press the shaft out of the end there, we'll get our 24 millimeter socket. Now this should spring out. Go ahead and put it again in the front, as well as your bypass valve. Check the bypass valve for any scoring along the sides. It should be pretty smooth, and with that spring inside, like so, you should be able to freely move it in and out. It shouldn't hang up at all. When this hangs up, that means your pump won't build any pressure. And a lot of times when these pumps fail, is they get, you know, debris inside or some metal shavings, and it starts scoring that bore. It's a very tight bore inside there, and then when your pump goes to the extreme and has to bypass and let some of that high pressure flow back to the low pressure side, it holds that valve open. Then the valve sticks open, and then you're no longer building pressure at normal RPM, and then you lose your steering. So it's very critical that we don't damage that in any way. So just set it in there. Now we'll go over to the press and just press this shaft out. It doesn't take a lot, like I said. Sometimes you can actually get lucky. It moved a little bit here. If you use some wood blocks, you can definitely get it out. I have a shot press, so I go ahead and just press it. I'll do that real fast. Alright, now we've pressed that shaft out. Again, we won't be needing this shaft anymore. Last step is there is a seal that we're going to replace inside here. The best way I found to get it out is flip the pump around, take a very small flat screwdriver, and with your hand from the look through the front, make sure you're on the back side of that, and just give it a light bump with your palm, and it comes right out. Again, we're going to be reusing that. So I've got one more piece to remove on the side, and one more O-ring here on the side that we'll be removing and replacing. So now your front housing is completely stripped, ready to replace all the seals and be put back together with the new components over here. So next step is I take a can of brake cleaner or carb cleaner and just spray it, clean it up really well. Make sure there's no debris. If you used any media to blast it, make sure there's absolutely no media left inside whatsoever. Any tiny bit, like I said, will score that bore, and then you'll be looking for a new pump. So I'm going to go take care of that, and then we'll begin with a new fresh paper towel or something, whatever you're working on, because there can be little grits and things, and I like to use bare hands when I work on these pumps, especially during reassembly, because you can feel the grit if there is some on your fingers when you're reassembling the pump. If you use a glove, you're not going to feel that, and you might put it back together with a bunch of that all over your fingers. So I'll step aside and get this all cleaned up and ready to go, and we'll begin the reassembly process. Alright, so now we've got everything cleaned up, ready for reassembly. We've cleaned the housing, we got our kit out. Like I said, we're going to reuse the front outer section of the pump. It's a thinner wall here, so there's more volume for the pump. If you look at the rear, it's a thicker section of the pump there. We're using the front inner piece. The rear hub, it has a smaller spline on the inside. Everything else is the same. It's a smaller spline. We're going to reuse the front bypass valve and spring. We're going to reuse the rear pins. They're a little bit longer. We're going to reuse the flow control valve, the wave washer, and one set of the vanes. It does not matter which one. Looking at our kit here, we're going to have a front seal, a main outer, large washer, our snap ring, a small, very skinny 1.5 millimeter washer, and then two larger ones of different sizes. The larger diameter is your outer seal. There, it fits there perfectly, so it's kind of hard to mess up. This one goes on your flow control valve. So what I usually like to do to begin is I will put the front seal in first. You don't want to forget this and press in your shaft Oh, and you also get the shorter shaft, the adapter, and AN fitting as well. But you don't want to forget to put your seal in and then put your shaft in, and then you won't see it not in there, and then your pump's going to leak. So first things first is I take just a little bit. I usually keep a little tub of some ATF fluid here. That's what I use in assembling and testing these pumps. Throw that guy in there. You should be able to just take a small socket and push it in with your hand. No problem. You don't need a press for that. The next step is to go ahead and put the shaft in. Again, I will also take a little bit and put it on the outer bearing here. We'll actually put the excess from our finger inside there as well. Take this over to the press. We'll get this pressed in, and we'll continue the assembly. Alright, now that we have that outer, or that shaft pressed in there, check and make sure it rotates freely. You shouldn't have any binding. If you do, it may not be pressed in there straight. Just look at the bearing around the edge. Make sure it looks equal. I use a socket that just fits inside there. That way it presses on the outer bearing surface rather than on any of the shaft at all. Just a better place to press it from. Next, we're going to go ahead and put the snap ring in. And then we're going to put the wavy washer on the shaft first. If you don't and you put the O-ring on this inner shaft, when you put the wave washer on, it could tear the O-ring and then ruin your seal there. So always do that. And I always take and just dip the O-rings in some of the fluid before installing them, like so. Next is going to be your large O-ring. Just get that lubed up. Put that in the external around the edge there. And then I take my finger and just take a little bit of fluid and coat the whole inside of this, because like I said earlier, when you put this on, it can be very difficult to get it on if there's not any lube, and you don't want to ever force it on. So then I usually take this and I'll just run this in the fluid as well. There is no actual orientation to these other than you do have to line up the two pins there. So that one just went right in. It should do that. If it doesn't go in, take it out, turn it around 180, and then push it in. There is that large O-ring behind there, as well as the wave washer. So you want to line these up, get them close, and I found you can do it pretty good with a set of snap rings, either on this internal hole here. It doesn't take much. Line it up and just give it a light press with your hands down, and that's it. Do not force it. It shouldn't take much to push them down in. They have to be perfectly square as they go in. If it's crooked at all, it will hang up and not want to go in. Some are harder than others. This is a good one. So after that's complete, we're going to put in this ring here. Now if you look at the back side of the middle pump, you can typically see the marking that it left from this. So you can see the N and the Y. There's an N and a Y there. So if you forget, you know the orientation of how the pump outer ring was in the pump. So what we want is the N and the Y facing out. And again, it doesn't matter which direction they are. Alright, now that we have the outer ring installed, we can take the two longer pins and just temporarily set them in there. It just keeps the outer ring from rotating on you while we install the rest of the internals. So again, we're going to match this text up with the outside facing. I go ahead and give it a good bath in fluid. Set it in there. Next are the individual vanes. I give them a quick little wipe down It's hard to see in this picture, but when you look from the top down of one of these little vanes, one side's rounded and one side is flush or square. The square side goes towards the center of the pump. The rounded side is what makes contact with this outer ring. So that's the way you want to install all of them. If you get one backwards, it could cause some damage. So just be very careful you get them facing the right direction. So yeah, give a good check, make sure every one of the inside portions is flat and the outer portion is the rounded side, and then it's good to go. Alright, now lastly, we'll prepare the rear housing. I take just a little bit more fluid, put it in the rear because there is a rear bearing back here. And you can give a little light coating of the surface here. Take our gasket, again with your finger, just put a real light coating there. Then just be careful you do align the correct way. One of these holes is a mounting hole, the other hole is for fluid to flow through, and that gasket should wrap around that. Again, same thing with the rear housing. One hole is designed for a bolt hole, the other is for fluid flow. So make sure you put this on the correct direction. Lining up the pins. By hand, just get them snug before you torque them with your torque wrench. So I just give them a good hand snug. Then what you're going to want to do is check that the shaft still rotates. If it rotates nice and easily, it doesn't seem like it's binding at all, you've done a good job. The pump's on the right track. We'll grab the torque wrench and torque these up here in a second. We'll go ahead and reassemble the entire pump, and then we'll torque everything in one step. So next I take the spring, same thing, get it lubricated. And then you can take the valve as well, bypass valve, get that nice and lubricated, drop that in, make sure it fits in there good. You don't want to get it bound up and not in there straight. You want to make sure it goes down nice and straight. Next we're going to take the smaller, fatter O-ring that's left, give it a dip, and place that over the flow control valve. We'll tighten down the flow control valve. Again, just hand tight for now. Alright, lastly we'll install our AN adapter. Same thing here, we'll just give this a little light coating of oil there, or fluid, and then we'll install this. This is directional, it is offset slightly, so just make sure after you install it that the hole is lined up with the factory. So same thing, we'll just give this a good hand tight. We'll come back and we'll torque it to spec. Then you would install your fitting. I won't do that this time. I've got a special one I install on there to test the pump that gets a lot of use and gets worn out. So alright, and the torque specs are 10 to 15 pounds on the rear bolts, or 10 to 13 pounds on the rear bolts, and 10 to 13 pounds on the side as well. And then the flow control is 50 to 51 pounds. And the nut for the end of the pump is 40 to 50 foot-pounds. And that is mostly what you'll need to rebuild your pump. So normally I'll test this pump next. If you built it and followed these steps, you shouldn't have any issues. Put it in your car, fill your entire fluid up, flush the old fluid out, fill it with all new. I use ATF fluid, and run your steering rack back and forth a whole bunch, and keep adding fluid to the reservoir. Keep doing that for quite a while, till no more bubbles are coming out of your reservoir. Turn the car on, let it idle, let it run for a little while. It will bubble up the system. Again, run your steering rack back and forth, and this whole time your front wheels need to be off the ground while you're doing this. Properly bleed the system. That's just a standard bleeding procedure for power steering pump. Properly bleeding the system, and you should have no issues with this pump running. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll assist in any way possible. Just note that this is at your own risk. If you damage the pump with this kit, there's not a whole lot I can do. I still do offer the service to do it for you. I've built a lot of these things, and I usually am pretty lucky and don't have any major issues with these pumps. So thanks again, guys, for watching and purchasing the rebuild kit. And as always, reach out if you need any additional assistance. Thank you.